I hope you all know how good you look out there. Oh boy. It's been a long 2 years. Well, I feel so lucky to be here, and I thank you for being here with us to make this comeback possible. Oh, I think we got to get the camera down here.
I didn't know you were going to sit over there.
He didn't know I was going to sit down. He
There you
didn't know
go.
I'm old and tired.
Looks good.
And after a year and a day had passed. That sounds like a line from a folk tale or a fairy tale, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a line from a true story that really happened, and it happened to me. It was exactly a year and a day after my husband's death that I moved. Now, I wish that I could tell you that I emerged from the flood of grief and the flood of Hurricane Harvey in Houston, Texas, that had descended upon me at the same time at the end of that summer, that I moved forward with my life. But that's not what happened. I just moved geographically. I loaded up all my worldly goods into a truck, and I moved 1,000 miles across the country. From the busy metropolitan area of Houston, Texas, to a teeny tiny town in northeast Tennessee. And I spent the next 2 months trying to do something I had never done before in my life. Make a house into a home for just one person. When you've always done things together, and then you find yourself trying to do it alone, you feel paralyzed. Well, Christmas holidays were coming finally, and my kids, that's what I call my son and my daughter-in-law, who live out in Portland, Oregon, they were flying in, and they were going to spend the Christmas holidays with me. And their flight was due into the Knoxville airport about 6 o'clock in the evening. And so I put together all the ingredients for a pot of soup, put it into the slow cooker, and I was going to make the 2-hour drive from my house down the interstate to Knoxville and pick up the kids. And I figured when we got back home later that evening, around 8 o'clock, we'd have a nice hot supper waiting for us. Best laid plans of mice and men. I headed down the highway toward Knoxville, and just as I was on the outskirts of town, not far from the airport, my son called, and he said their second flight had been delayed, and they would be 1 hour to 2 hours late getting into Knoxville. So I decided I wouldn't go on to the airport. I would stop somewhere along the way, and I would get something hot to drink. It was a really cold night, and maybe a snack to hold me until we could get home to soup. I looked at everything that was available along the road, and I saw up ahead an Applebee's. And I said, surely I can do better than that. And so I just kept driving. Well, after going about another mile or two, I realized, no, I couldn't do any better than that. So I turned around, made a U-turn, and I went back and I pulled into the parking lot. And I walked into the Applebee's. And the hostess asked me where I'd like to sit. Now, I didn't know, but usually single people, when they go into a restaurant, they will ask to sit at the bar because they look less conspicuous that way. But I said, I'd like to sit at a booth. Well, it so happened that there was a booth available. And so she led me back through the crowded restaurant to that booth. There were a lot of people in Applebee's that Friday night before Christmas. There were young couples, there were old couples, there were families with children, and there was this area where there were 4 tables pulled together, and there was a bunch of people, about a dozen of them. They were celebrating something. I figured it was a bunch of teachers celebrating the fact they had managed to survive until the Friday before the holidays. So I slid into that booth. It was big enough to hold 6, 7 people, but there I was, sitting back in the corner of that booth. And the hostess laid a menu in front of me, and so I held it up in front of me. I was trying to hide behind it. I looked up in a few minutes, and I saw my waitress approaching me. She had on this name tag. It said, "Hi, I'm Tina." She was beautiful. She was blonde. She was brassy. She was buxom. She was a knockoff of Dolly Parton, if there ever was one. I thought to myself, oh, please, Tina, do not try to be my best friend tonight. Just take my order and leave me alone in my misery. Well, there she was, standing right next to me. She looked around at that empty booth, me sitting there in the corner, and she said, "Hi, I'm Tina. Welcome to Applebee's. How many are you tonight?" How many am I? How many do I look like? I'm one, just me. I didn't say that. I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking that maybe my husband was running late and he would be there to meet me as soon as he got off work or out of his meeting, or maybe she thought that my best friend was going to meet me and we were going to do some Christmas shopping that Friday night. I just smiled. I said, "It's just me, Tina. I'm here by myself. This is the first time in my life I've ever eaten in a restaurant all by myself. I gotta tell you, I hate it, Tina." She got up right close to me and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Oh, hon, bless your heart." And I mean that in the nicest way. She said, "Listen, I'm going to stand here right next to you. I'm going to shield you. You go ahead and you just do whatever you need to do there. And hey, here's a napkin if you need to blow that snot out of your nose." She said, "I'm not going to leave until you're ready for me to leave, but I want you to know something. The people in this restaurant, they are not looking at you feeling pitiful. They don't have any reason to pay attention to you. They got troubles of their own. So don't you worry about those other people. What they think of you is none of your business. And hon, a lot of them, they're jealous because they would like to be over here in this booth all by themselves like you are." I thanked her, and then I looked down at the menu and I said, "So Tina, what's good on this menu?" She leaned in close. She said, "Honey, this is Applebee's. It ain't the cordon bleu." She said, "I can tell you what to avoid. Don't order that mac and cheese. My kids tell me that tastes like Elmer's glue on cardboard, and they ought to know, they've tried both of them. But listen, if you want something really good, just flip that menu over. On the back, there is this thing called a blue ribbon chocolate brownie. It comes with a scoop of ice cream and some chocolate syrup on it. Honey, it's really good. It's worth the calories. I'm telling you, you ought to try it." I said, "Well, thanks, Tina, but I can't do that because I haven't had my supper yet, and I don't eat dessert before I eat my meal." She said, "Why not?" I said, well, it's a rule I always live by. She said, you know, if you don't break a rule or two, they're going to break you. I said, listen, just bring me, how about a cup of hot tea and maybe a side salad? All right, she said. I'll be back in a minute. And so she headed off to the back to put in an order. Well, about that time, that group of 4 tables over there, one of those teachers turned up their cell phone, and there was this song playing. It's called Christmas All Around Us. It comes from a movie that came out back in 2003 called Love Actually. That's back when Colin Firth and Hugh Grant were still young and beautiful. And my husband and I watched that movie in 2003. We actually went to a movie theater to watch it. We loved it. That became our favorite movie, and so then it was a tradition. Every year at Christmas, we had to rent that DVD, and then eventually we could stream it. And we would watch Love Actually every Christmas. I sat there listening to it, and yeah, I could feel it. I could feel it in my fingers. I could feel it in my toes. I could feel it in the snot bubbles in my nose. And then this little kid who was sitting in the booth on the other side of mine was wailing at the top of his lungs, and he flung his little sippy cup over his booth into my booth, and I picked it up. And I handed it over to his frazzled mama, and I said, cherish these moments. In a little while, Tina came back, and she brought me my side salad and my tea. And I sat there fiddling with my phone, waiting to hear from my kids, and just pretending to read that menu over and over again. Finally, after 2 hours went by, during which that time Tina had walked by my table numerous times, and she had looked at me and nodded as if asking did I need anything, and when my cup was empty she would bring me another cup of tea. She'd bring me saltine crackers. When it was time to go, I asked her for my check, and she said, listen, hon, when you decide you're ready for one of those blue ribbon chocolate brownies, you come back. It's on me, on the house. She said, I'm here every night. I work till midnight. I'll be looking for you. So I left her tip, I paid my check, and I headed out to my car. Just as I got to the car, I heard somebody hollering coming out of Applebee's. And she was yelling at me. It was Tina. She was running toward me, and she was holding up something, and she was saying, wait a minute, you forgot these. She got up close to me. She said, oh, Lord have mercy, it's colder than a witch's nose out here. Now, to tell you the truth, it wasn't exactly the witch's nose that she mentioned. It was some other part of the witch's anatomy. But since this is a church camp, we'll just let it go at nose. And she held up these 2 purple gloves. She said, you forgot these, huh? I said, no, those aren't mine, Tina, but thank you. She got up close. She said, I know. They've been lost and found for the last 2 months. She said, I just needed to have a reason to come out here and give you a hug. She said, I also wanted to thank you. Because you see, when I get home tonight, my husband, he's going to be sprawled out on the sofa, watching reruns of a football game that he's already watched about 4 times. And my kids, they are going to be running around with their heads turned backwards. They're going to be high on sugar. And the dog's going to be puking all over the carpet because he's tried to lick all the cheese off the pizza box. I'm going to be dog tired, and I am going to want to drop kick all of them right across the house. But I'm going to remember how much I love them. I'm going to be grateful that I've got them. So thank you for that. And then she gave me that hug. She said, you put these gloves in your glove compartment, honey. I don't care what you do with them. You got this, girl. And she walked back into Applebee's. I drove away from Applebee's and I said to myself, I got friends in low places. My kids were waiting for me at the curb at the Knoxville airport. I picked them up. We drove back up Interstate 81. We got to my little house on a hill in Jonesboro, Tennessee, and the next 10 days went by much too fast. We cooked, we ate, we played games, we played music, and we watched movies. We watched Game of Thrones, the entire series, and we watched Mandalorian. They love that sci-fi stuff. And then the last night they were with me, I said, hey, there's one more thing we gotta do. You know, it's a tradition. We gotta watch Love Actually. So I found a streaming app where I could play it. I put it on. I'd made some popcorn. We settled down on the sofa and I laughed and I cried all the way through that movie. My kids slept through it. They think it is the dumbest, schmaltziest movie that was ever made. The next day, I drove them back to the Knoxville airport and I jumped out of the car when I got to the curb. I ran around to help them get their bags out and I gave them that goodbye hug. And I said, I miss you. I love you. I wish you didn't live so far away. And my son said, we miss you too, Mom. And we love you, but you're the one that decided to move 1,000 miles east. But Mom, listen. Portland, Oregon is only a plane ride away. And then he kissed me and he and his wife turned and they headed into the airport. But as he was walking away, he turned his head and I could read his lips. What he said was, remember Christopher Robin. Oh, I knew what he meant. Because when he was a little kid, 5 or 6 years old, we read Winnie the Pooh together over and over and over. We both loved Winnie the Pooh. And my favorite page, which he remembered, was that part where Christopher Robin says to Pooh that he is braver and stronger and smarter than he thinks he is. And he says to Pooh, remember, even when we are not together, I will always be with you. So I started back toward the interstate. I looked over on the right and up ahead I saw that Applebee's. And I thought, why not? So I pulled in, I parked, and went inside. Now I knew Tina wouldn't be there because she works the night shift. She had told me that. She's always there till midnight. And this was noon. But I went in and the hostess who met me said, would you like to sit at the bar? And I said, no, I'll take a booth. So there was an available booth. She took me back there and I slid in toward the middle. A waitress came over toward me and she said, do you know what you want? I said, yes, I will have a blue ribbon chocolate brownie. And I want 2 scoops of ice cream and double chocolate syrup on it. And she said, would you like a sandwich or a bowl of soup or maybe a salad with that? And I said, no, I'm having dessert for lunch today. She said, all right, whatever you want. Well, I ate up that chocolate brownie. It was delicious. Breaking rules is kind of fun. And then, when I got ready to leave, I walked up and paid my bill, and I said to the hostess at the front, hey, is Tina coming in later today? Oh, yeah, she said, she'll be in for the supper crowd. She works till midnight. I said, okay, can I leave her a note? Yeah, she said, sure, I'm good friends with her. I'll give it to her. I said, okay, just a minute. I went out to my car and opened up the glove compartment, and I got out those 2 purple gloves. And in one of them, I put something that had been hanging over my rearview mirror. It was a little folded paper angel. I had started folding paper angels when my husband died. He had been working on a book that he had hoped to have published. He had a publishing company, he had a contract, but he never finished the book. And so I took those manuscript pages and I fan folded them, origami folded them, any way I could fold them, and I made angels. I just liked the feeling of being surrounded by angels. And one small one was hanging on my rearview mirror, and I put it into one of those purple gloves. And then I wrote a note, and it said, Dear Tina, you were right about the chocolate brownie. Thanks for being a friend when I needed one. And I signed it, the tea drinker. I put that into the other glove, and I carried those gloves back in and asked the hostess to give them to Tina when she came in. I got in my car and I headed back up toward Interstate 81. And I turned on Spotify on my phone and ran it through the audio of the car. And the song that came up was a song that I've loved for a long, long time. It was actually written by Stevie Nicks back in the 70s, but it was re-recorded in the early 2000s by a group called the Dixie Chicks. Now they call themselves just the Chicks. I've always loved those girls. And the song that started to play was Landslide. And the words that Natalie sings are, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I built my life around you. But time makes us bolder. Even children get older. And I'm getting older too. You know, it's hard to drive on an interstate when water's dripping out of your eyeballs. Amen. 2 hours later, when I pulled into the driveway of my little house on the side of the hill in Jonesboro, Tennessee, I stepped out of the car and I clasped the locket that I wear around my neck that holds a curl of my husband's hair. I took in a deep breath of that fresh mountain air and I said, you've got this, girl. gotta thank Josh for that song about the locking and the curl. It's true, Josh. It's an old tradition, but it still exists in my family. Back in 1988, I was watching the Democratic National Convention that was being broadcast on the TV from Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the keynote speakers that night was the great governor of Texas, Ann Richards. And Ann, in her keynote, was talking about women in politics. And she said these words: after all, Ginger Rogers could do everything that Fred Astaire could do, and she did it backwards in high heels. Yeah, some of the rest of you remember that too, don't you? And I thought to myself, I've heard those words before, and I had. 25 years earlier, back when I was in high school, my speech teacher, Miss Maddie Bess Caulfield, had said those exact words to our girls' debate team. You see, we had just found out that year in National Forensic League competition, the girls' debate team was going to have to compete in tournaments with the boys' debate teams. They were going to have to compete against the boys. They had never done that before. And Miss Maddie Bess Caulfield said to the girls on the debate team, "Of course you girls can win this tournament. After all, Ginger Rogers could do everything that Fred Astaire could do, and she could do it backwards in high heels." Because you see, Ann Richards, the late great governor of Texas, went to my high school. Now, she was a few years ahead of me, so I didn't really know her personally, but I sure did know of her. And I knew that Ann Richards learned a lot about public speaking from Miss Maddie Bess Caulfield of Waco High School. I think a lot of us did. Now, one of the things that Miss Caulfield taught me was how to deliver the words of a poem or a speech without them sounding like you had memorized them, even if you had memorized them. And then she also taught us how to look sincere when you were delivering a speech, even if you were not sincere. It is no wonder that a lot of Miss Caulfield's students went on to become Texas politicians. And so that knowledge that I had gained from Miss Maddie Bess Caulfield came in real handy. Because my junior year in high school, I was in an English class, and the teacher's name was Mr. Roy Cornelius. Now, he was known as the most persnickety teacher at the high school. He demanded perfection in every assignment that he gave us. Well, in the spring of that year, we were studying Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And so our assignment was that in 1 week's time, everybody in the class had to memorize, word for word, the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, all 42 lines in Middle English. Now, we were Texas kids. We could barely speak regular English. How were we supposed to memorize 42 lines of Middle English in 1 week? It seemed impossible. Now, some of you may be old enough to remember that prologue. Remember how it starts out? Juan the Prele with his sorest soto, the doctor's march hath heresy to the rota, and bathed every vein in swish liqueur, blah, 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 blah. 42 lines of that. And then Mr. Cornelius said, "Boys and girls, I want you to get to know Geoffrey Chaucer forwards, backwards, inside out, and upside down." And I thought to myself, I just want to get Chaucer behind me and get on with my life. Well, that was when the work began, trying to memorize those 42 lines. But see, I had some help that even went back further than Miss Maddie Beth Caulfield, because back when I was in elementary school and I entered this, well, it was a talent contest. I didn't really have any talent, but I thought maybe I could deliver a poem. And I had this neighbor, his name was Mr. Sam May. He was kind of the poet laureate of South Waco. That man had thousands of poems in his brain, and he could just deliver them on a moment's notice. And I said to him, Mr. Sam, how do you remember all the words to those poems? And he said, well, I have a little trick. I set all my poems to music, to tunes that I really like and that I can remember, and so I'll just sing the poem over and over and over again in that tune, and then that way I can remember the whole thing. And I thought that was just a wonderful thing to know. And so sure enough, when I was a little bit older, I was in junior high and I had to memorize a poem of Emily Dickinson's. And so I picked her poem called Death. And I decided to use the tune to San Antonio Rose to learn it. And so when I had to deliver that in class, it went, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in all eternity. So you see, it worked. And so I decided I was going to use that technique from Mr. Sam May to learn the 42 lines of the prologue to the Canterbury Tales in Middle English. And I was going to look as sincere as I possibly could, like I had not memorized all that stuff, as I delivered it. Well, the day came. And so each person in the class stood up and delivered the prologue, and when it came my turn, I stood up and I proudly delivered it to the tune of that wonderful song by the immortal Hank Williams, Your Cheating Heart. One that April, with its surest hood, the blood of March had pierced to the road, and bounded every vein, and swish and swish, and swish liqueur. Well, hallelujah, I survived. I made it through all 42 lines, and I guess Mr. Cornelius must have had a sense of humor, because he gave me a passing grade on it. I don't think my classmates really appreciated my technique. They kind of thought I cheated. But you know, it really didn't bother me what they thought, except for one kid in that class. He sat about 2 rows behind me, the next aisle over. He was this kid who had blonde hair. He wore it in a flat top, which was different from most of the boys in high school at that time, because Elvis was popular and they were all wearing their hair slicked back in a Baptist preacher bouffant. His clothes, they didn't look like a lot of the other boys' clothes. They looked like hand-me-downs. They were neatly pressed though, and they were clean. And every time I'd get up close to him, I liked to smell of him. He always smelled like Lifebuoy soap and Brill cream in his hair. And sometimes I would follow him into the lunchroom. I wanted to sit next to him, but I never had the courage to actually do it. I figured out that he was on the free lunch program. So I knew his family didn't have much. But what was the thing that stood out most about him to me, I guess, was how smart he was. And not in a show-off kind of way either. But he sat right in front of me in trigonometry class. And when I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on, I would tap him on the shoulder and ask him if he could explain to me what the teacher just said. And he could always do it in a way I would understand. My mama had told me once that stupid was contagious. And I was hoping that maybe smart was contagious too. The thing that I also noticed about this boy was that he didn't have the kind of shoes that the other boys wore. They wore white socks, you know, with their jeans kind of rolled up so you could see the socks, and they had on black loafers. And he wore high-top Converse. And that was back before Converse was a thing. And so that day when I finished my recitation of the prologue, I looked back to that blonde flat-top boy to see what his reaction would be. And he smiled and he nodded. And so when we had all finished our prologues, Mr. Cornelius stepped to the front of the room and he congratulated all of us, and then he said, "Now I wonder if any of you boys and girls took my challenge." What challenge? Hadn't we done enough? He said, "Remember I said to you I wanted you to learn Geoffrey Chaucer forwards, backwards, inside out, and upside down? We thought he was just being colorful." But that blonde-haired flat-top boy raised his hand and he said, "I tried, Mr. Cornelius. I believe I can deliver the prologue backwards." "Well, stand and deliver, son," said Mr. Cornelius. And so that boy stood up in front of the class and he recited all 42 lines, word for word, backwards, in Middle English. And I said to myself, I'm going to marry that boy. Because if he worked that hard on a stupid poem, I know he's going to work that hard the rest of his life in everything he does. And my God, he can do everything Geoffrey Chaucer can do, and he can do it backwards in high-top Converse sneakers. And so 5 years later, that boy and I got married. And 50 years later, we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. And on that day, after our special candlelight dinner, he said to me, if we could relive those 50 years and all the ones before that all over again, would you do anything different? And I said, yeah, I would. If I could do them all over again, I would live them backwards. We would start out in our 70s, and year by year we would live them, and we would end up 17. In Mr. Cornelius's English class at Waco High School, when the sweet showers of April pierced the drought of March and bob at every vein and swish liqueur.